Hello everyone, this is Professor Reimer. This video is for my world history students on Wednesday, May 12th and Thursday, May 13th. It's entitled Unit 9, DOL 11, Impact of World War II. In this lesson, we will explain the impact of World War II by comparing maps. Now, as always, before we get started, let's do a preview activity. Maybe my slides, there it is. All right, make a prediction. What important changes in the world happened as a result of World War II? Pause the video, take a few minutes, make this prediction. All right, welcome back. Before we get into the engagement part of the lesson, let me just say we have reached the end of our Unit 9, which is called World at War. It's been a few days since I've made a video, so hopefully you've been reading the textbook readings that I've assigned and doing the taking the notes and doing the annotated map as I've assigned. If not, go back and check those videos out. That's what we have been doing. Where we're going is wrapping up Unit 9 with our Unit 9 exam and then our Unit 9 writing assignment. We've switched the order. So in this unit, we're going to do the exam first and then the writing assignment. That will happen all next time. So this lesson is going to be doing multiple things. We're going to do a bit of review for the exam, but also a bit of writing prep work in order to do the writing assignment. So that's what's going on. Here we are back to the lesson talking about the impact of World War II. So it led to important changes in the world. We're going to talk about one primary one today, but in the next unit, we're going to look at many others. But here we are, a map of World War II. Check out the key down there at the bottom, 1939 to 1945. Now, let me point out that those are the dates for World War II in Europe. World War II in Asia, depending on which date in the 1930s you use, is going to be either 1931 with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, 1933 Japanese invasion of China. Let me just point that out. So it's primarily fought, remember, between the Axis powers, and you see those represented by what is that, yellow orangey color? So Japan, Japanese Empire, Germany, and Italy. And as you can see in 1942, they control an enormous amount of territory. Now, they are opposed by what are called the Allied countries, who are primarily the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and its allies, such as India, such as Australia, such as much of Africa, and not on this map, though Pearl Harbor a little bit, the United States. And as you can see in 1942, the Allies, they controlled an enormous amount of territory, but not as much as they had controlled in previous years. We'll get a bit into that in our review. So one of the most important changes after World War II was the beginning of the Cold War. All right, and we're going to start our next unit with this topic, the Cold War. But just as a preview, during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union, see the United States here in green, Soviet Union here in purple, entered an era of distrust and hostility. And it lasted basically from the end of World War II in 1945 all the way until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. So, what was it? Well, it's called a Cold War because the Soviet Union and the United States never clashed in open battle, as in soldiers with guns shooting each other in a front line. Okay, they're rivals, and they dominated world politics. But it was an era of competing ideologies. Struggle for which ideology would dominate the world. The USA was promoting democracy and capitalism, while the USSR, remember, that is the full name of the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, tried to spread communism. Now, as we'll see in the next unit, This Cold War, as this map indicates, will turn hot, where there will be clashes between Soviet-backed forces and countries and US-backed forces and countries. But that's outside today's objective, okay? But as a preview, this is where we're going next unit. That these ideologies led to a desire to spread these ideas and an era of distrust, hostility, proxy battles, meaning battles between your friends and allies, and near nuclear war. That's where we're going. But before we do that, let's go back and talk about World War II and how it increased tensions between the USA and the USSR. You see here what are known as the Big Three. This is Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States. And Joseph Stalin, officially the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the USSR, which is a mouthful. We'll call him the leader of the Soviet Union. During almost most of the war, Stalin, remember, here he is, big mustache, he never really trusted the British or the US. Chiefly because, as you read, most of the fighting between Germany and the Allies took place on Soviet soil between the Soviets and the Germans. And Stalin wanted his allies, the US and Great Britain, to open a second front, a western front in France, to take the pressure off of his army and his country. They delayed, and so Stalin mistrusted them. He also mistrusted them because of how the post-world, especially in Europe, was going to look. So I forgot about this. The Allies, they didn't really share everything with Stalin. Most notably, their nuclear weapon technology. The United States was developing nuclear weapons in what is known as the Manhattan Project, and they didn't share it with Stalin, though he knew that they were doing it. All right, so I mentioned there was mistrust over what was going to happen after the war. Pretty much at the war's end, I think early spring 1945, at Yalta, which is a resort here on the Black Sea in what was then the Soviet Union, they met, the Big Three, they met to decide what would happen with Eastern Europe. And Stalin agreed to allow self-determination. In other words, the peoples would vote what kind of government they would have after the war. Now remember, in 1945, the Soviet Union forces had retaken all of Eastern Europe and were in Germany battling the Germans. And the United States and the British had invaded France on D-Day and had pushed all the way into Germany. So that's why you see this map with the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, because they were, and in green, the United States and the United Kingdom in Western Europe, because they were, right? They are both had come in to Germany from the east and the west. And in 1945, they are closing in on Hitler in Berlin. All right, so it's important to note what happened to the Soviet Union, or to Russia more specifically, in World War I. They had been invaded by Germany. Remember what happened in 1939. Hitler broke his promise to Stalin in the non-aggression pact. He had promised Stalin, we will not invade the Soviet Union in exchange for the division of Poland. He invaded anyway. So in the span of 20 years, Russia and the Soviet Union had been invaded by the West, most notably by Germany. So Stalin wanted this buffer zone, this area between the USSR and the democratic nations in Western Europe, where he could have sort of protection in case the West decided to invade again. And he used his military, instead of allowing self-determination, to install communist governments in Eastern European nations. So this end result of where the Soviet armies and the Allied and the British and American armies were in 1945, it's it sort of remained for the next 50 years or so. So these Eastern European nations, they either turned communist, or I'm sorry, they either like were completely, wow, we got some storms here. They either were completely controlled by the Soviet Union, that's the area in black, or they were countries that were communist and Soviet satellites. In other words, nations that were influenced by the USSR. You see there Finland, Poland, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Eastern Europe, right? And in the West, you have areas under the influence of the United States and Great Britain, all right? And in the years after World War II, the U.S. especially began to see Stalin as a new Hitler. In other words, a dangerous dictator who wanted to take over the world. Turns out, looking back, most historians would argue that was not the case, that Stalin was looking to merely be defensive in holding on to what the Soviet Union had gained as a result of World War II. But that was not the opinion at the time in the West. And we'll get more to that in the next unit. All right, so this is the key date here, 1946, and you'll know why in just a minute. Europe was divided by an Iron Curtain. Not really an Iron Curtain, a figurative separating line. Sometimes it was a real line with barbed wire fence and walls that separated democratic capitalist Western Europe. You see them in green, from communist totalitarian Eastern Europe. You see them in purple. All right. The reason that date is important, because here's our task today. Compare maps of the world in 1922 and 1946 by creating a Venn diagram. So I just showed you 1946, and I'll show it again to you in just a minute. Now let's go back and, again, like I said, review a bit of this unit so that we know what's happening in 1922. That way you can compare. And remember, we are exploring the impact of World War II on the world. So let's go back. Remember, we started this unit called the World at War with World War I, 1914 to 1918. Remember, that is a war primarily between Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire. You see here the Triple Alliance. Triple Entente. Triple Alliance. Yeah, Triple Entente. It's French for the French. I think that's right. Oh, man, I'm a bit rusty. Anyway, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, in this darker orange, they're one side fighting against the United Kingdom, France, and look, the Russian Empire. Okay. As a result of the war, Germany loses. And there were some key effects of the war on the political map of Europe. So let's note this. It's not part of the task, but it's, again, very important to review. All right. Notice the countries that disappear. Austria, Hungary, gone. Ottoman Empire, gone. Russian Empire, gone. Right? These were multi-ethnic empires that broke apart. So Austria-Hungary broke apart into many different smaller states. You see there Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia. Turkey broke apart. I'm sorry, the Ottoman Empire broke apart into Turkey, as well as, and I'm covering it up here, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, and the Palestine were administered as mandates, basically land controlled by either France or the United Kingdom. And the Russian Empire broke apart into these, what we call the Baltic states, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Part of Poland came from the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. So the big idea here, as a result of, hey, go back, there we go. So as a result of World War I, old empires are gone and new states emerge. All right, so remember our task, compare maps 1922 and 1946. So this is the key map. This is the world in 1922. Okay. Now, as a bit of review, before we revisit the map from 1946, let's remember also what's happening in the world, between the worlds. And we didn't really talk about this much in class, but Western Europe still has its imperial possessions in Africa, in Asia. There is a growing independence movement as a result of nationalism in these areas. And you see here examples of that in the 1920s and then in the 1930s. We will visit the flowering of those movements in our next unit. But in between 1919 and 1939, remember, it is still a European-controlled world of colonies. Most notably, though, is who doesn't have colonies in this period? Germany. As a result of the war, they were forced to give up their colonies. All right. Now we move to World War II. All right. Remember, it is fought primarily between the Axis powers, Germany, you see there, Italy, and on another map I'll show you, Japan. Germany, early in the years of the war, have enormous success, right, in taking Poland, parts of France, and most of Eastern Europe, right, either directly or indirectly. They're opposed by the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom. You see there in like that orangish reddish color. Those colors in yellow, those are neutral countries, and the colors in green are allied with Germany. So basically, Germany and its allies control all of Europe. All right, by 1941. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the Japanese control most of East Asia and Southeast Asia, right? They've advanced into what was called Manchuria. They renamed it to Manchukuo. They control much of China, almost all of Southeast Asia. They conquered the Dutch East Indies, and most of New Guinea. Later in the war, right, the United States and the British are going to push them back by island hopping all the way to the mainland, so that by 1946, right, Japan is pushed back all the way to its home island. And remember, Europe is now divided between the capitalist democratic West and communist totalitarian East. This is 1946. So your task now is to compare maps of the world, 1922, 1946. So in those blanks, compare and contrast. What are you comparing and contrasting? World in 1922 and world in 1946, right? So you know what? I'll even put this PowerPoint in the assignment. That way, if you want to have the maps in opened up, that way you can, and that might be best, right? So I want you to look at the map in 1922 and look at the map in 1946. And what do you notice that's the same? I would start with the similarities. And most notably, we're looking at boundaries and countries, right? What boundaries are the same and what countries are the same? What territories are still controlled by which countries in those 2 years? But then also, I want to see some differences. What new countries are present? What countries aren't present? How have the boundaries shifted? All right. Get to it. Work hard. Let me know if you have questions. I'll see you in the Google Meet.